My name is Marty Gregg. I'm the ex-director of an MSc in Material Science and Engineering. And I'm handing over to a new director, Miriam Arredondo, who I'll introduce at the end of the, oh, there she is, at the end of the talk. Okay, but it's fair that I'm giving this presentation because, I was involved with the creation of the MSc in the first place, and also, I guess, in the initial stages of the derivation of this postgraduate certificate in material science and engineering. So, look, my video's just gone off. It'll probably come on in a bit, but the reason is that my internet connection is a wee bit dodgy. So hopefully the audio will stay on and will be okay. But in any case, look, welcome to this presentation on the postgraduate certificate in material science and engineering. Let me tell you something about it. So as I say, it has been a condensate, if you like. It's been derived from a material science and engineering MSc, a full MSc. And in a second, I'll tell you about the specific nature of the modules that are involved in this postgraduate certificate. They've been selected quite deliberately and carefully as a kind of subset of the modules that are involved in the full MSc. But look, when this MSc was first thought about, I was tasked with the notion that it should be relevant to materials-related employers on the island. And there was a lot of motivation for having this kind of postgraduate qualification, I guess particularly from Seagate and Intel, but also from Thales and some other players in the sector. What all of these guys were keen on, when I talked to them in the design phase, was that there should be absolutely no compromises in terms of the technical knowledge and information of fundamentals that's conveyed in the modules that we teach. As employers, they find that the state of the technology will move very quickly, but if people are absolutely on top of the fundamental aspects of materials science, materials chemistry, and physics, then they will understand the basics of whatever happens, whenever it happens, irrespective of what the technology is about. So a lot of this course has been designed so that the technical information is fundamental and timeless. So the kinds of things that you'll be learning have been true ever since they were discovered, pretty much, and will continue to be true almost certainly for the rest of your careers at least. Okay, the other thing that they said was, that students, I guess especially from undergraduate, but students that come on board for working in their companies tend to, if they've been taught the fundamentals very well, that's great, but they tend not to be able to interpret those fundamentals and apply them to solving problems terribly easily, at least not for the first while. And the employers have found that that's something that they really need to work on with new employees to make happen. It's something that they do as on the job, if you like. And so one thing that they stressed to me was that if we were going to design this kind of postgraduate education from a standing start, then for goodness sake, can we do it so that we combine the information, the knowledge that is conveyed with some kind of capability to test that knowledge and to apply that knowledge in a real analysis situation. So that's what we've tried to do, and I'll demonstrate that to you in a second. The other thing that came, I guess, very keen that students should learn something about appropriate materials selection. And that's an aspect of the MSc that we've also brought in to this postgraduate certificate. Okay, so let me carry on. But the point from this really is that this course has not been designed in vacuum. It's been done in consultation with a number of the key players in the materials sector on the island. Okay, now, as we'll see in a second, the modules that I've chosen, or that we've chosen as a subset of the full MSc, really give you the most fundamental information that you need to then go on to work in the area of material science and engineering. It's the core, if you like, of the master's course. And as a result, what you get even from these 3 modules is pretty much all of the skills that are represented on this skills wheel that was used to advertise the MSc course. So this developing fundamental materials insight on the top right-hand corner, that's what I'm talking about. The core lecture modules that you'll study are really designed at developing your material science and engineering fundamental insight. But then, if you look on the top left-hand side, this problem-solving sector of the skills wheel, whatever you think of it, that problem-solving is also going to be, it is embedded in the way in which we teach the 3 modules associated with this postgraduate certificate. So you'll get sort of information conveyed through lectures. You'll have then sessions, problem-solving sessions, where you apply that information to either an analysis of a data set or to forming some opinion on the basis of data that's presented to you, or doing calculations and that kind of stuff. But applying the information that you've gained into a sort of problem-solving environment is integrated into the way that we're teaching it. So you get the upper 2 sections of the skills wheel, no problem at all. Okay, the bottom 2, let's look at those. So selecting materials for purpose, this is the thing that Thales we're rather keen on. We do that, and I'll talk more about that in a second. We do that through these things called Ashby diagrams, and you'll be learning how to use the software associated with the development of Ashby diagrams for trying to select scientifically the best materials for specific engineering purposes. And then the bottom left one, handling and interrogating data, well, that's all part of this problem-solving kind of thing that's integrated into the course. The only part of this skills wheel that you won't get explicit training on in these proposed 3 modules is the managing projects. And that's really something that we do teach on the full MSc, and it prepares students for the research program that they do over the summer, usually for the full MSc. But all the rest you will be doing in the postgraduate certificate. So, that's, I guess what I'm saying is that, the same skills that were thought about for the development of the MSc will also propagate onto the skill set that you'll develop in this postgraduate certificate in material science and engineering. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the details of the 3 modules that are going to be taught on this postgraduate certificate. Okay, so the first, let's take the first and the third first, if you like. So the first one here is functional properties of materials. This is really dealing with getting to grips with absolute fundamentals for what gives a material particular electronic structure, electronic properties, whether it's a conductor or an insulator or a semiconductor. If it's a dielectric, how that dielectric behaves under an electric field, that's the functional aspect of what it is to be a dielectric. If it's a magnetic material, how does magnetism arise? And how can magnetism in a material be controlled using an external magnetic field? Optical and plasmonic response, they're really to do with the interaction between light and materials, which is absolutely a fundamental cornerstone of functional behavior. And then there's diffusion, kind of thrown on the end a little bit. But that's thrown in because diffusion is so important for all aspects of transport, whether it's mass transport, to some extent electronic transport, thermal diffusion, all sorts of properties of materials that involve the carrying of one stimulus from one side of the material to another are reliant on the same basic laws of diffusion, and so those are included in this functional properties of materials module. The other sort of basic properties fundamental cornerstone is the mechanical properties of materials. So we talk about fundamental functional characteristics, and we talk about fundamental mechanical characteristics. And when you've got the grips with both of those things, you understand an awful lot about how material is going to behave. So this bottom module on this slide, MTS 7002, specifically hones in on the mechanical properties. What happens when you push, pull, stretch, hit a material? How does it react, and why does it react in the way that it does? So we look at the stress-strain relationship. We look at the details of elastic versus plastic deformation, and what underlying things are going on inside the material that result in those two deformation modes. We talk about failure, about toughness, hardness, and there is an exposure to the various mechanical testing methods that are out there. So, in order to establish whether a material is hard, soft, elastic, plastic, whatever it is, there are standard measurement techniques that are used. So with those two modules, you cover the very basics of what a material does. Either it does something in terms of functional behavior, or it does something in terms of its mechanical behavior, or both. The other module is specifically directed mostly towards the characterization of a material. So if you know the basics of how materials can behave in terms of their function and their mechanical properties, great. But how do you determine what those properties are in the first place? And that's what the characterization module is all about. Now, it's material selection and characterization because we felt it most appropriate to put the material selection component, the Ashby diagram stuff, getting the right material for the right purpose, into this selection and characterization module. So over on the right-hand side, there are some cool images, but the middle image there is an image of an optimized chart as used for material selection according to the Ashby diagrams. And that's kind of software that you're going to be exposed to as part of this material selection and characterization module. But beyond that, then there's exposure to a whole series of different characterization techniques, which are used in high-end materials investigations, let me put it like that, both in academia and in industry. Okay, so those are the details of the talk modules. Let's talk a little bit about the timetable for delivery. So, all right, so in order to make sure that we can get through these three modules fully between January and the end of March, which is a requirement for this postgraduate certificate, we need to start on the 11th of January. And what you see here is the kind of timetable that's associated with each of these three modules. So we start with functional properties of materials. Weeks beginning the 11th of January and the 18th of January will be delivered lectures plus what we call dry practice. I'll go through what they are in a second, but you can imagine what the lectures are. Now this is all online, and so these lectures will all be delivered online, either pre-recorded with some kind of tutorial type augmentation that's done live, or they will be streamed live, and that very much is up to the lecturer and the module coordinator for each of the modules. Normally we'll have 2 weeks of delivery of material and of applying that information and that knowledge to solve problems. That's the first 2 weeks. Then the third week is usually devoted to completing some kind of self-directed assignment. And that will be a longer problem that is given to you by the lecturers. And you work on that by yourself, and then you hand that in usually at the end of the third week for any given module. So for the first module, functional materials, properties of materials, that'll have a hand-in date at the end of the week beginning the 25th of January. Then in the fourth week, this 1st of February beginning for 7021, in that week, really there is time for you to revise, to solidify your knowledge of that subject on the basis of the lecture materials being given, on the basis of what you've learned from these dry practicals, these classes where you kind of learn how to apply information to solve problems, and through your assignments. You revise all that stuff, and then towards the end, middle or end of that fourth week, there is what we call a class test, but in reality, it's going to be an exam that you do remotely. Okay, and then it's rinse and repeat. So we do the same thing for material selection and characterization. There's a couple of weeks where the information is given to you and you learn to kind of apply that information to solve problems. Then there's an assignment week, and then there is the class test. And the same goes then with mechanical properties of materials right at the end. Now, the reality is, I guess, we need to be done by the 31st of March, or the course needs to have been delivered and completed by then. So I think in this last week, 29th of March, we're probably looking at the class test being on the Wednesday of that week at the latest. Okay, so that's the kind of layout of how things look from January through to March 2021. And as I say, I'm sure you're all very well aware of this, the entire thing is going to be delivered online, and that gives you some flexibility in how you approach the learning. Okay, now, this structure of the teaching weeks is, as a consequence, a little bit redundant in the sense that there will be an awful lot of flexibility in the time that you devote to working on this postgraduate certificate. However, I wanted to put this slide up to remind me to talk about several aspects of it. So, the general feel in terms of the balance of workload is going to be like this, but just distributed more freely over time. So, the first 2 weeks of every module normally look a bit like this. Normally have a lecture for an hour and a half, maybe it's kind of almost a double lecture, where information is conveyed much like this, using PowerPoint and talking through it. It is meant to be interactive, so questions and so on are fully encouraged. Debate is fully encouraged. After that lecture, you then have a kind of cooling off period. Now, if it's face-to-face, that's only half an hour. But when we do it online, then you can do this dry practical component, which is the use of the lecture material in order to solve problems. You can do that in your own time within reason, because probably we want to have lecture available for discussions when you hit problems and so on and so forth. And when you want to discuss the things that maybe you didn't quite get in the lecture, that are only exposed when you try to start using that information to solve problems. And that's the idea, is that often that's the case. You think the lecture makes sense, you think you're on top of it, but then when you go to use the information, suddenly you realize that there are gaps. And that's what this dry practical element is all about. Okay, so normally it's lecture material followed by a dry practical every day for the first 2 weeks. And then there is quite a substantial amount of time, which is much more flexible, which isn't direct contact time, but is time which allows you either to finish off dry practical components that you didn't quite get on top of, or to unpack the lectures a little bit more in your own time to try and really understand what's going on. Okay, so that's the first 2 weeks. And then, as I said, the third week, generally an assignment, the fourth week, generally revision and the doing of some kind of class test or exam. Okay, eligibility. Let's talk a little bit about the entry requirements. So this is just taken from the website for these PG certs. There are two kinds of requirements. The first is to do with your educational background or your experience. The second is to do with socioeconomic requirements and whether or not your position fits the brief for DFE's investment in these courses. So, let's look at the socioeconomic requirements first. So all four of these requirements are really saying has your organization been badly affected by the COVID pandemic? And if it has, and it fits into any one of these four brackets, and you can demonstrate it does, then you're eligible from this COVID impact perspective. Okay, so you can read those in your own time. They're on the website anyway. But basically, it's either if you have lost your job or suffered reduction in expected earnings if you're self-employed, or if you've been furloughed, or if your partner's been furloughed and you're not employed, then basically you're eligible. Provided also if you live in Northern Ireland. In terms of the program specific educational requirements or educational experience, this is what we ask for. So a minimum of 2 BSc honours in any physical sciences or engineering or any cognate area of study. So it might be mathematics, it might, these are the kinds of things that we consider on a case-by-case basis. But basically, if you've done, primary degree in chemistry or physics or mechanical engineering, we don't ask any other questions, provided you got a 2 or above. But if your background is slightly less obvious, then we will still consider you for a course, provided you've got at least a 2.2, or provided you have some kind of experience, either in the workplace or outside of conventional education, which, when we consider it, makes us feel that you would be able to take the course on, and that you would do well on the course. So there's a reasonable amount of flexibility in terms of consideration of people's diverse backgrounds, which I think has been so far a good thing for the MSc at least. Okay, so then what? Well, it's an uncertain world, so I wouldn't make any promises about what happens after this postgraduate certificate is finished. The notion, the idea behind it is that we should be preparing you with the very basics in material science and engineering that will allow you to go further. So either allow you to find employment in a materials related commercial body, or to carry on with your education or your research in materials science and engineering. And I guess the first step in that usually is to transfer to the full MSc. So the PGCert is 3 taught modules delivered the way that I went through there. The full MSc is 6 taught modules, so it's twice that, delivered in the same way, plus a summer research project. Now, when that's going to kick in, if any of you take this on and decide to carry on in the full MSc, that is yet to be completely decided. But it's either going to be the summer research module will occur after Easter 2021, or it may be after Easter 2022. It just depends on the results of the discussions of the nitty-gritty of how that transference to an MSc might happen. So I would like to say that you could complete it as soon as possible, but there are minor wrinkles in there that haven't been ironed out just yet. Okay, but what is for sure is that at least 2 of the remaining 3 modules would be taught in the period October to December 2021. The reason I'm hesitant is because we've actually selected 3 modules for the postgraduate certificate, one of which doesn't normally run in the 2nd semester. Normally it runs in the 1st semester. And so there might need to be some accommodation to fit the remaining module that's normally taught in the 2nd semester into the 1st semester next year for you guys, if you wanted to do the MSc. So a few wrinkles, but with discussion, those will be sorted out in time. Okay. And then key contacts. You met Miriam earlier on. So she is the new course director and will be looking after this postgraduate certificate. Solveig, in the picture below Miriam there, is the school's director of all postgraduate taught provision. So we have another MSc and another PGCert actually going forward in data analytics. And Solveig oversees both the data analytics and the material science and engineering provision. And just in terms of contacts, I mean, if you have got questions and you want to email, you can email Miriam or Solveig. You can email me. You'll see me on the website m.greg@qub.ac.uk. I'm less relevant now. That I guess is my point. So that's why I'm trying to direct you towards Miriam or Solveig. But if you have generic questions that you don't think are appropriate for the course director, then we have support for these postgraduate certificates in the teaching office. And there the key contacts really are Claire Watson, and you can get that on MP, Maths and Physics, postgraduate taught, PGT at qub.ac.uk, or Jenny Finlay, who is in charge of all of the teaching office educational provision, jenny.finlay@qub.ac.uk. Okay, look, I've taken about half an hour, so that's more than enough. Are there any questions? And please feel free to get it all off your chest now. I should say that the course has been running for a couple of years now with full MSc. And it seems to be going quite well, and people have been moving on productively to PhDs or to materials related internships or jobs. So it seems to be doing business.
There is a question there from Sami in the chat. It's asking, can I apply if I'm not eligible?
Can you apply if you're not eligible?
Yeah.
I mean, it depends. If you're eligible in terms of the basic requirements for the scheme. So in other words, resident in Northern Ireland, you suffering the consequences in terms of your financial position because of COVID. If you're eligible for those reasons, then that's fine. If you feel that you're ineligible because of educational background or whatever, then you can absolutely apply because your particular background will be considered on an individual basis. It doesn't mean you're going to get an offer, but it does mean you'll be considered. Whereas if you don't meet the fundamental requirements of being COVID affected and being a resident in Northern Ireland, then you won't be given an offer for sure.
Thank you, Marty, for giving that presentation for us, and thank you to our attendee.